We're doing these live seminars because we've noticed that people find it a little bit more easy to submit questions while Edit is talking, and that you can submit your questions in the text in the chat box. Of course, this meeting is being recorded, so if you're watching this at a later stage, you can still submit your questions via questions@Nijenhuis or Nijen. I don't even know how we pronounce our last name in English. Nijenhuis or something. You know how to write it, .nl, or questions-advanced@nijenhuis.nl. And secondly, we're hosting live video classes because the financial authorities require us to charge 21% VAT over digital products, such as pre-recorded videos. So we can circumvent this by giving live seminars as we do now. So that is the technical reason. And then I still want to alert you that next month we will start the clinical training in small groups. These trainings are specifically designed to help people who are new to Alice theories. And it will be a bit more engaging, 100% more interactive. And you will get a bit of a better relationship with a few other members and another associate of ours, so that you can more easily ask questions. So if you want to participate in these clinical trainings, you can do that by sending me an email, or maybe read one of the other emails I've sent you with the link in there. So then you have to select a gold membership, which is essentially the same price as you're paying now, but then just you do it, you make an annual payment, which also makes you committed for 1 year to follow these clinical trainings. For any questions, you can ask me, and now I will give the word to my father.
Thank you, Karanda. Hello, everyone. It's a pleasure to see many familiar faces again and to continue our work. This is the third video in a row. In this video, I'd like to address a single question, and that is, what is a dissociative agent? First, perhaps a few brief remarks on the importance of this question. As I've mentioned before, dissociation these days is defined in many, many ways, so that it's hard basically to understand what it actually is, and for that matter, what it is not. For dissociative agents, the term that I've introduced, many other terms are in existence. For example, some colleagues talk about dissociative identities, or dissociative self-states, or dissociative parts, as we, Onno, Cassie and I did before, and as Onno continues to do. In order to answer the question, what a dissociative agent is, and what other ways of being and becoming are, we need to be able to answer a couple of questions. We must define what is integration, and we must define what is disassociation. I'll be talking about this in this video. Please give us the next slide, Karanda. We may pause for a while and think about integration and differentiation. What is it? We so easily say traumatic memories must be integrated, different parts must become integrated. We less often contemplate what differentiation is. But if you think for a while, a little reflection will tell you that integration is not just bringing things together, coupling things. Generally, when we speak about integration, we mean coupling two or more things while differentiating them. Actually, there are a range of actions that involve integration and differentiation. They were proposed in a very clear form by Piaget. He spoke about synthesis, personification, presentification, symbolization, and realization. Let's see what this is all about. Next slide, please. First, I would like to pinpoint this. Generally, we speak about a feeling, a thought, a memory, a way of acting, doing something. Those are substantives. We should, however, not forget that when we use a noun, like a feeling, we must do something to have that feeling. In order to have a feeling, we must feel. In order to have a thought, we must think. In order to have a memory, we must remember. In order to engage in a particular behavior, to have a behavior, we must behave in a particular way. Thus here the idea is an action, when we engage in an action, we get a result of some kind. Just as when we have a particular result that we generally indicate with a noun, there is a verb, there is something that we do, there's an action that is the other side of the coin. Indeed, they are two sides of a coin, the action and the result. I think that's a good thing to keep in mind, also clinically. When we have a symptom, a disturbing feeling, that implies this type of thought, that the patient is engaging in bringing forth that particular feeling. If the patient has a particular thought that is disturbing, the patient brings forth by thinking that particular thought. If the patient has a traumatic memory, the patient is bringing forth something that happened before again. Next slide. Synthesis. The present moment. What is our present moment? It generally, research says, about 2 seconds. Let's call that synchronic synthesis. Something that we do in this brief episode of time that we generally address as our now. The phenomenal now, as philosophers say. The phenomenal now lasts 2-3 seconds, sometimes shorter even. What do we have now? Just as we are sitting here, we see something, we feel something, sense something, perhaps smell something, taste something, in any case, hear something. We make particular movements, we feel particular things, we feel a longing, we feel an affect, an emotion. We do things, we think. And those elements we somehow bring together. We bind them, we couple them. We bring them together, we integrate them, but we also differentiate them so that we know that the sight is different from something we hear, from something we smell, taste. A movement is different from a feeling, and so on. Thus, we bring stuff together in this phenomenal now while differentiating them at the same time. And we may ask, what leads us to see this, hear that, smell such, taste so, rather than something else? Because in our environment, for example, when we speak about visual perception, there are many, many things we can see. When we walk around in nature, there are many, many sounds and smells. Why do we synthesize this rather than that? It's my idea that in this regard, that which we long for is pretty decisive. It guides what we bring together, what we integrate, what we synthesize, and what we differentiate. Synthesis, then, that is the action of synthesizing some things and differentiating these things from another set of things, we can mark that as a striving. Here we have again that phrase, longing and striving. We long for something, and the striving is to bring together that which I need to fulfill my longing. Next slide, Candy. Here we can graph it like this. Here in an abstract way, I've put longing 1, 2, and 3. And I've connected them with their own perceptions, cognitions, thoughts, memories, affects, sensations, and behavioral actions. They are a sort of horizontal coupling, as Susan Hurley used to say in a wonderful but complex book, Consciousness in Action. That which we long for guides what we will perceive and not perceive, what we focus on and not focus on, what we think and are less inclined to think, what we feel and are less inclined to feel, what we do, what movements we make, and what movements we withhold, do not engage in. And this picture hopefully shows that when we have one particular longing, that the perception, the cognition, the affects, and the behavioral actions are different, just as they shift with a third different longing. And the next slide shows that in a more concrete fashion. And it says, when your longing is to eat an apple, you will tend to perceive, think, feel, and do certain things and leave alone other things. You bring together, you synthesize some things and differentiate them from something else. For example, you will differentiate an apple from a banana. When the longing is to admire a flower, clearly you will smell different smells, be interested in different smells, in different colors, in different movements. And when you listen to music that you find relaxing, again, you will have different perceptions that you engage in. You will have different thoughts, feelings. And these three longings are different, but it is probably not too hard to integrate them. You differentiate them. The one longing is different from the other longing. The one perception, thought, etc. is different from other perceptions, thoughts, feelings, and so on. But they are not too hard to synthesize, to bring together. We can thus listen to relaxing music while admiring a flower at the same time and eat an apple. That's not too hard. The next slide shows that it can be very different. And actually, this is what I tried to pinpoint already in the first two videos. Here, the longing is, for example, I want to eat something. Another longing is, it's very important to me to track the mood that the abuser is in. He is or she is currently still relatively calm, but she might shift any moment. I need to track his or her moods very closely. Well, that is hard to combine with eating and enjoying eating an apple. The longing may also be, and it's even more difficult to combine that with the second one, and that is the longing to attach to the abuser. I need the abuser. She is my mother, he is my father. I need them, I need this attachment relationship. And when I am after attachment, clearly I must perceive, think, feel, behave differently as compared to being guided by the longing to track the abuser's mood. There's particular syntheses among each other, to integrate them among each other, it can be much, much harder. And they are the harder, the more different, the more contrary the longings are. Next slide. These syntheses, synchronic synthesis, that which I see here now, where does that I see come from? Why is it not, there is perception here, there is seeing something here, there is feeling something here? Now we say, I feel, at least in the standard case, in the normal case. We say, I see, I feel, I hear, I move. Where does that I come from? What do we mean when we say, I see, feel, etc.? If we contemplate the issue, in the very least, we can distinguish between I, or if you like, self, as it stands for the whole organism that we are, or the part, the so-called part of an organism that we refer to as our I, the one who feels, the one who knows, the one who moves. And generally, or let me put it like this, it may happen that when we say that we do not mean us as the whole organism, but we mean us as the I. And they're not the same. Then what is that I? Philosophers speak about the phenomenal self. Next slide, please. In order to be a phenomenal self that has particular experiences, we must bring forth something that we experience and refer to as our I, as our, now in the sense of phenomenal self. There is not a view from nowhere. A view is always a view from somewhere. Experience implies the subject who experiences. That is the first person perspective. I am experience. I am feeling, I am thinking, I am doing. And I do that from a particular perspective. That is my I perspective. I look upon the world, other people, and myself in a particular way. At the level of the first person perspective, we really speak about experience, about living life, so to speak, from a perspective. When we bring forth a phenomenal self, we say, I experience. We can, and we do, also bring forth and act different person perspectives. There is what I call the quasi-second person perspective. That is this phenomenal self as related to the phenomenal me, mine, myself, such that I can say, I see my hand. I bring forth a phenomenal self, I, and I relate this to a hand. And it's not a thing, it's not your hand, no, it's my hand. That's a phenomenal relationship. Phenomenal stands for as it appears in personal subjective experience. And it's a relationship. I is related to me, to mine, to myself. We also bring forth a second person perspective, particularly or specifically when we engage with another person that we experience, know as a you. So now there's a phenomenal I, there's a phenomenal you, and there's the relationship that we build between them, the coupling. That's the second person perspective. And it's still a phenomenal relationship because it is the relationship as it is grounded in experience. The next slide shows that we also have a third person perspective that we can enact, bring forth. Here we speak about the phenomenal self, the I, in this sense, as related to things. I and the pencil. I, something that is experiencing, knowing, feeling, perceiving, and a thing that we regard in the third person perspective as an object. I and the pencil. That's a kind of physical, technical relationship. At least that feature stands out more than in the other person perspectives. It's still a relationship, I and thing. But it's less grounded in experiencing, just as such as happens when we, as an I, relate to you. It's more I and the thing. Now, clearly, if this were a very precious gift someone gave to me at some point, then it's almost a little bit more a you than the thing. I'm very attached to this pencil that I got as a present in a particular situation. And it becomes a little bit more phenomenal when it's just another pen and it's a thing. When we make a diagnosis, we engage in the third person perspective. What is wrong with the patient, technically speaking? When we set up a relationship with her, we're interested in setting up a relationship with him or her, then we clearly set up a second person perspective. When we then feel how we feel in this relationship, we engage in the quasi-second person perspective. And it's all grounded in the first person perspective, experience. In personification, we create a link between a particular synthesis, something seen, heard, felt, etc., and a phenomenal self that is the one who feels, thinks, perceives. Next slide. Just to repeat, the word I or self can stand for the whole organism. For example, I alert, as the whole organism is doing such and so. It can also more specifically stand for the phenomenal self. Alert as he enacts his own idea and feeling of who he is. That's our private, very private, personal experience that can also clearly be social. It's an experience and it's a conception. It's the way we experience ourselves at a level also of thinking as an image. Next slide. We are easily tempted to think that there is an objective world, things as they are in themselves. Philosophers basically agree that that is an illusion, because things do not have meaning in and of themselves, and it is highly debatable what exactly constitutes an object, for example. Where does it start? Where does it end? Of how many parts does the object exist? How many objects does an object include? Basically, what is called an object is something that is indeed called an object. That meaning is given. That thing, as it is for me. To repeat, there is not a view from nowhere. The objects and the events, the whole world, our whole world, it is our experience, our view from that world. It doesn't come out of the blue. Clearly there is a world, but how that world is, how we experience it, how we think it, how we perceive it, that is subjective. Thus, there's always the combination of a subject and an object. The phenomenal world, then, is the world as we experience, know, and live it. The next slide brings it together. As we live, as organisms, we enact, we bring forth in every waking moment, if all goes well, a phenomenal self, a PS, a phenomenal world, a PW, and this phenomenal self as a part of this phenomenal world, abbreviated as PSW. That's what we do now. That's what we did a moment ago. That's what we'll be doing in the next few minutes, actually in the rest of our life, basically, as long as we're awake. Thus, an action, then, to enact is to experience, to conceive, to live a phenomenal self world. Now, it is a bit curious that we are tempted to believe that our phenomenal self is the cause of our actions, of our experiences, rather than the result. But I do think it holds that our phenomenal self, being enacted, is the consequence, not the cause. Actually, Buddhists would totally agree with that. And so do quite a few philosophers these days. Thus, our phenomenal self and world are enacted, are brought forth. And who does it? Well, here it says our organismic self. It's a future objective of mine in the next video to discuss what that organismic self is. I will leave that matter for this moment alone and return thus to it later. Because that is a sort of illusion we may be having, the idea that our phenomenal self is the cause, the one who does, who lives, etc., rather than the result. And that also goes for our phenomenal world, that we sometimes are inclined to take for an objectively existing world, whereas it is not. Next slide. Synthesis. Bringing things together is generally highly selective. When we are interested in eating an apple, and when we are really, really having an appetite, and there's little else around, we will be inclined to experience and perceive just that, the apple. That means that our whole world, that could include millions of things, is brought, concentrated on one thing, meaning basically that every perception, every thought, every experience is a less, not a more. This is the idea that was proposed by Henri Bergson and after him Gilles Deleuze, two French philosophers. Things that can go right can go wrong. The synthesis, and I'm still sticking here with synchronic synthesis, that which we bring together and differentiate in the present moment, our phenomenal now, can be problematic. It can be lacking. For example, it is common that we feel our body. In pathology, it is not uncommon that particular people do not feel or sufficiently feel their bodies. That would be an example of proprioceptic anesthesia. I do not feel my body. I do not feel my movement. That's a kinesthetic anesthesia. I do not hear so well. Auditory anesthesia. I cannot have sexual feelings. I don't feel them. Genital anesthesia. I cannot see so well, visual anesthesia. I do not feel pain, analgesia. Lack of synthesis can also pertain to motor action. I can't move this hand. This hand is sort of not mine. I'm not really connected with it. I want to move it, but I can't. If you'd like, that is an anesthesia of the motor system, an inhibition perhaps. It could be a paralysis. It can also be a contracture. I have a fist. I cannot open my fingers. Lack of synthesis of the motor function. I'm emotionally numb. A lack of synthesis of affect. Or I am beset by just one particular feeling. This whole world is a very dangerous place. It's always fear, always fear. And I do not synthesize other feelings, like it's nice to meet with friends. The lack of synthesis can also pertain to longing. In the 19th century, it was known as abulia. You find it described very well in Piaget's works. Next slide. Personification is also a kind of synthesis. It's the combination of something seen, felt, etc., and the phenomenal self. When personification is strong, you say, I see, I do, I want, and you emphasize the I. It may also be, as we see in particular patients, that there's more the question, do I exist? Am I here? That is a lack of personification. It can also be that it's the quasi-second person perspective is too weak. I am here, but that thing over there, you say it's my hand. Not to me. To me, it's more like a thing. You tell me that I, a while ago, did such and so. No, I don't do such things. That's not about me. That must be someone else. Can also be that our I-you relationship, that second person perspective, is weak. I am here, but are you here as well? Or I am not very clear who I am I here? And you seem sort of vague as well. A weak second person perspective. Or in some forms of pathology, I am here and you are more like a thing. You're not really a you, you're a thing, you're a puppet, you're a soldier, and you should fight for that which I find important. I don't care. I don't even feel that you have feelings and interests yourselves. You should do what I want. That's a very weak second person perspective. Actually, the other person, the you, becomes more like a thing to me. As many perpetrators and dictators seem to feel, the other person appears as a thing, as they turn what should be a second person perspective into a third person perspective. And even the third person perspective can be weak. Things look unreal to me. Is this really happening? Is it really happening that Russia is invading, making war in Ukraine? No, many Russian people seem to feel that can't be true. That is not really the case. Good. Next slide. The synchronic synthesis encompasses 2-3 seconds at most. But life is a continuation. But in order to be a continuation, to have a consistent phenomenal self, to have a consistent phenomenal world, to have a consistent phenomenal self-world, we need to couple these ongoing synchronic synthesis. And that is known as diachronic synthesis. To couple separate experiences so that they become a sort of whole. That is clearly also a form of integration and differentiation. It's not just creating a heap of experiences or thoughts. No, it's still I now, I as I will be, I as I was. It is brought together. It is, so to speak, my identity, the one I was, the baby, the young boy, etc., the older man, the very old man. We bring it together and we differentiate. I am Ellert. I used to be the baby. The baby Ellert is also me, but it's different from the me, my current identity. And still, it is me. It's integrated and differentiated. We do that at the level of all these personal perspectives, if all goes well, so that we have consistent experience, consistent thinking, consistent perceptions of me, myself, you today, you tomorrow, basically the same person, and the consistency of things, the pencil now, the pencil yesterday, the pencil tomorrow, the diagnosis today, the diagnosis yesterday, and the diagnosis tomorrow. Thus, we engage in synchronic synthesis and diachronic synthesis. And also with regards to diachronic synthesis, things can go wrong. Next slide. In order to have a consistent life history in the end, consistent experiences on a smaller scale, we need to presentify, Genet told us. Presentification is bringing past, present, and future together such that the present moment is experienced as more real and thought as more real than this past and this future. That's very important that we do that because, as Pierre Genet told us, we can only act in the present moment. We cannot act tomorrow, not yesterday. We can only act now. Thus, it's very important that we have a good sense of the present. But that present should be connected with what was and what will be. Otherwise, you get very weird behaviors. Next. If we have lived something horrible, we need to take that to ourselves. We need to integrate that in our life history while differentiate that. It happened yesterday, not today, but it happened. A lot in traumatization pertains to a lack of presentification. The past is either not real enough for some dissociative agents, for example, and it is far too real for other dissociative agents. For A and P, generally, it is not real enough or not real at all. And for EP, it is too real. The past becomes the present. And it is a lived experience for EP. The perpetrator is here. He hits me now. The horror is happening here and now, and it's happening to me. As if that me is still a child, rather than an adult, for example. And it's not a story told. Many of our memories are autobiographical memories. They are stories told. We cast our experiences in words, create stories, or make drawings representing our experiences, put them in the form of paintings, statues, or music. They are ways of symbolizing. So now the immediate experiencing at a level of the first person perspective becomes connected with a symbol, a word, a range of words, a story, or another representation of that experience. And it's very important that we do that. We can, by symbolizing, bring a whole lot of diverse experiences and happenings together. We can couple them so that we get our concepts, our conceptions, that which we bring together. As concepts, they just group a whole lot of things, they integrate a whole lot of things. They should not be everything. We still need to differentiate them from other things. This concept must be different from that concept. As I say, for example, the concept of dissociation should be clear. It should not mean 10 different things, because then we collect too much in one bag, and the bag contains way too much. But it's a good thing to have a concept as a tool, and then in symbolizing, we distance ourselves a little bit. Yesterday becomes, in part, a story told. The very bad things that happened to me, I can now finally put them in words. And by doing that, they become part of my past. They start to disappear in a distance. That's the function of symbolization. And it's an important action. Next slide. And then, knowing is not enough, Janet told us. You may know something, but not realize it. He meant by that knowing as such need not have positive or negative implications for the rest of one's life, for example. In realization, however, things change. Knowing that such and so is the case has, as I now realize, take to myself, it has particular implications. I really won the gold medal. It is true. I can't believe it, but it seems to be true. I cannot even realize it. I have won the gold medal. Or for that matter, that child that got herself abused, that was me. It's not a different part of me. It's not a dissociative agent in the end. It's about me. It's real. It happened, and it had such and so consequences. Realization is taking account of that which you experience and know. Next slide. The world does not have meaning in and of itself. Your own experiences do not even have meaning in and of themselves. Meaning is something that must be made. Thus, while we integrate and differentiate actions in the form of synthesis personification, we bring forth realities that will have a particular meaning for us. And what meaning they will have is, to a large extent, I claim, dependent on that which we long for. And meaning making is not something that you do by choice. We do it. We are built to make meaning. To us, to organisms more generally, there is no neutrality. We are not built as therapists to have a neutral view on the patient. That's a sheer illusion. Sure, we try to withhold our own biases as much as we can, but we will make meaning, whether we like it or not, whether it suits us or not, whether it's adaptive or not. We are built to make meaning. More on this will follow in a future video. Next slide. Because when we are engaged in enacting our phenomenal self and our phenomenal world, we are at all times busy making meaning. What do I mean to myself? What do you mean to me? What do I mean to my being? What do these things, these events mean to me? And the meaning shifts with different longings and strivings that we may have. For example, we can have two incompatible longings. I want to go shopping, but in as much as I have agoraphobia, I will feel it's way too dangerous out there. I want to be rich, but I don't want to work a whole lot. Don't leave me, don't come close. Inasmuch as an individual brings forth one phenomenal self and has different modes of longing strivings, I do not call that dissociation. Because if we start to call that dissociation, there's a stable phenomenal self with shifting modes of longing and striving, every person is dissociative. And concepts should be specific. They should be sufficiently specific. If a concept is huge, we talk about things. Everything can be a thing. Give me that thing. Don't do that thing. Thing can stand for everything. And it has lost all meaning. In common language, that may work up to a point, but in good clinical work and in good science, it's important that our concepts have specificity. Therefore, I find it important to delimit the concept of dissociation and, for that matter, dissociative agent. Thus, I distinguish between different moods and different modes of longing and striving, and I do not call those different moods and different modes of longing and strivings dissociative parts. Next slide, please. Conflicting modes of longing and striving, it's clear that they involve conflicting syntheses. Feeling this, feeling that, wanting this, wanting that. The world is like this, the world is like that. But they also involve a rather stable personification, a rather stable first person and quasi second person perspective. I feel this, I feel that. The organism brings forth a relatively stable phenomenal self, and connected with that, a relatively stable phenomenal world. But there can be conflicting presentifications. For example, I want to pass tomorrow's exam because I remember past failure to pass exams after partying, versus I want to party tonight. Forget about the past. Who cares about tomorrow? Here we see two different presentifications, two different ways of making meaning, different syntheses, synchronic and diachronic, but the phenomenal self is mostly stable. It is still, I want this, I want that. That's a conflict. Next slide.
10-minute mark.
Good, thank you. Thus we can say different modes of longing and striving involve a singular phenomenal experience and conception of self, a singular basic first-person perspective. And that contrasts with dissociative agents, because dissociative agents, as I define them, they enact their own phenomenal self and world, their own first-person perspective. They clearly are related to one organism. The organism is not disassociated in this sense. No, it's the phenomenal self that is dissociated. Clearly, there is division within the body too, division at the level of the brain. We will get to that later. But still, it is one organism. What is specific for dissociative agents is, I repeat myself, that they enact their own phenomenal self world, their own first-person perspective. And with this distinction, we are clear. We know what we're talking about. We know how to distinguish, using this tool, dissociative agents, thereby does dissociative disorders from shifting modes of longing and striving, more ubiquitous conflicts. Next slide. And this whole stuff about the distinction between dissociative agents and modes of longing and striving is described in the second book of the Trinity of Trauma, in the Blue Book. I believe it's chapter 24 or 25. You can read that for yourself and track me and see if you could agree with me or if you disagree. Dissociative agents then are not things, they are actions and passions, more specifically organized sets of actions and passions. A&P has particular actions here in blue that are specific for A&P, and EP has specific actions that are specific for EP. They can also have particular actions in common. Both walk the same body, so to speak. Both speak English, German, French. Thus, dissociation is not splitting. There is a degree of overlap between these organized sets of actions and passions. There are some things, some actions and passions they have in common. Therefore, I reject the term splitting. Next slide. If we want to put that in a formula, and maybe you hate formulas, and I basically do, but I like these ones, because if you grasp them, it is clear in one sentence what dissociation is. We have a whole. Later I must discuss with you, and I will discuss with you what that whole is. There is a whole. That whole encompasses two dissociative agents at a minimum, two or more. The V stands for, and it's a symbol in logic, disjunction. That means two areas can be totally divided, but they can also have overlap, and it's still a disjunction. Thus, here the whole W encompasses dissociative agent and this one and dissociative agent 2. Each of these dissociative agents brings forth his or her own phenomenal self world. Thus, the A1 brings forth PSV, phenomenal self world 1, and that also goes for agent 2. And these two agents are different. Thus, the whole now encompasses two dissociative agents, the A1, the A2, and each of them brings forth his or her own phenomenal self world. Isn't that a lovely formula? Perhaps not, but I like it. Hope you get to like it too, or criticize it, and we will reconsider. Next slide, please. With this in mind, we can say that there's a spectrum of complexity of dissociation. In a prototypical sense, we can distinguish, say, 4 ways of being. In simple PTSD, there's one large structure that we metaphorically refer to as A&P. A&P is more than a metaphor, but it's just the term that when I say metaphorically, then what I mean is that apparently normal part of the personality, to use Janetian terms, that is a metaphor. I do not mean to say that A&P as such is a metaphor, or that EP as such is a metaphor. They are psycho-biosocial, and I'll be getting back to that later. If that is the simplest form, and DID is the most complex form, then there are forms in between. They could be complex PTSD, where some EPs get more evolved, start to encompass more actions and passions, gain perhaps a higher degree of independence. In partial DID, that takes on an even stronger form, where basically it is still the apparently normal part that is mostly present up front. Occasionally, it may be that an EP takes full control of behavior and consciousness, but generally it doesn't happen that much in partial DID. And then in full-blown DID, you get switching all over the place. Parts intruding on each other, taking full control at times over behavior and consciousness. That's the spectrum. Next slide. With this in mind, we can say what we just saw, that is a structural view. We see two or more subsystems of a whole system. That is a structural, or if you like, systemic feature of a dissociative disorder, more or less complex. These subsystems are not states. I find the term dissociative state difficult because when people speak about dissociative state, they do not have one particular state in mind. Because the so-called dissociative state can actually encompass 20, 30, 100 states. And that is thus better grasped by saying that these subsystems are dynamic. They are changeable to a certain extent. They do things, they have dynamics within themselves and between themselves. And that relates thus to their strivings. The one wants this, the other wants that. That's the third principle. They are teleological. They are, each of these dissociative agents, they are guided by their own longings. The one wants this, as I said already, and the other wants that. And therefore they engage in different strivings. That's the dynamics. And they do that because they are different subsystems of a wider system. And the fourth feature is phenomenology. Phenomenology. That's a hard word for me. And that is, each of these subsystems enacts his or her own self and world. They enact their own first, quasi-second, second, and third person perspectives, such that the one I, the one phenomenal self world, is not the other. Next slide, please. If you're interested, you can reread or read this trilogy. It's 3 parts. The book from 2015 has 2 parts, and the third part is actually in the second book. The first 2 are empirical, theoretical, and historical. The third part focuses more on clinical issues, although it also has still a substantial part that is theoretical. And I claim that all the theory, in the end, is very, very practical. It's good to know what you're talking about when you're dealing with very, very complex phenomena. Good. Last slide. The next video, I already announced it, shall be addressing what dissociative agents are then actually subsystems of. What is the whole? Janet spoke about the personality. I have my reasons for having a slightly different idea. Although it's not too different, it is a bit different. And I would like to share that with you. Once we got that in place, we can better, I think, understand and describe dissociative symptoms. Good. That must conclude the present video. It was a joy watching your faces. I hope that those who could not be here today will also enjoy listening and contemplating the things that I tried to share with you. If you have questions, you write them in the chat box, or you communicate them to Kuranda and in any other way, so that during our live meetings, we can discuss the concerns that you're having, the questions that are on your mind. Good. Enjoy the rest of the day, and I'm looking forward to meeting you again. Thank you very, very much for your attention.